The new era of Formula One has officially begun, with these cars featuring new power units and new aerodynamic regulations hitting the track in racing conditions for the first time this season, and the result has been a strange race. It's really hard for me to draw conclusions from a Grand Prix that has been difficult to understand overall, but it has left us with a bit of chaos, some interesting battles, and a winner who simply lived up to his status as the favorite this weekend. The Melbourne race is over and it's time to start drawing conclusions from what we saw today, but at least for now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the summary of round number 1 of the Formula One World Championship. As always, before the race started, we had some unpleasant surprises. First, the local driver Oscar Piastri had an accident on the formation lap while heading to the grid, and due to the damage, it was impossible for him to take part in the race. So, in front of his home crowd, Piastri was out of the Grand Prix before it even started. On the other hand, Nico Hülkenberg, before reaching the main straight to line up on the starting grid, also had a reliability failure and unfortunately couldn't take part in the race either. Pole position was taken by Joe Russell, who revealed the true potential of the car and gave a clear beating to the rest of the competitors on the grid. He was 3/10 ahead of Antonelli, his teammate who qualified second, but 8/10 ahead of the third-place qualifier, making it clear that once again Mercedes was in a position to lead Formula One. Antonelli would be second and Hadjar the runner-up for the start of this Formula One World Championship in 2026. Sunday was the moment for the much-anticipated debut of these technical regulations, and it was time to see who had the tools and who didn't for the start of the 2026 season. And once the cars lined up on the starting grid, the traffic lights would go out, and with that, the Australian Grand Prix would begin. As practically everyone expected, the Ferraris took off like fighter jets, and as if they were making a start straight out of the Formula One video game with the AI set to 0, they overtook all their rivals as if they were standing still. Mercedes had bad starts, and Leclerc took first place at turn 1 of this circuit, leaving Ross in second and Hamilton in third, with Antonelli dropping to 7th position due to that poor start he had. Another driver who had a bad start was Liam Lawson, who was practically left standing still when the Grand Prix began, but others who managed to move up were Lindblad, catapulting himself up to 5th position, and Fernando Alonso, who at the start moved up to 10th place. Leclerc, however, would quickly start to be pressured by Joe Russell, who, just on the next lap, the Briton caught up with him and quickly overtook him at turn 11. However, Leclerc didn't give up and regained the position a lap later, putting up a fight against the all-powerful Mercedes of the British driver. Further back, other drivers were making up positions. Antonelli overtook Lando Norris, Lindblad and Hadjar before lap 7 to recover some places. Verstappen rapidly gained positions, quickly entering the top 10 on the grid. But everyone's eyes were on the front of this Grand Prix because once again, Russell overtook Leclerc on lap 8, but in that same lap, the Monegasque driver regained the position. And one lap later, Russell went for it in turn 1, but immediately after, Leclerc regained the position and prevented the overtake. So this start of the race was extremely explosive with this little battle between Russell and Leclerc. Hamilton was also involved. Antonelli took advantage of the battle to close the gap to the front, and for a moment, all 4 cars were running hard in the leading positions and were quite close to each other. However, the first retirement of the race came on lap 11 when Hadjar's engine died in the high-speed section before turn 9, which caused him to retire and brought out the first virtual safety car of the day. And this would become a key moment in the race because almost all the teams took advantage of it to make a pit stop. Norris, Sainz, Lawson. Alonso and Stroll were the first to come in for their first tire change in the pits, since they had the pit lane right in front of them when the neutralization happened, but on the next lap both Mercedes came in for a double stack, and guess who didn't come into the pits? The 2 Ferraris stayed out on track because they felt they needed to go for a different strategy to beat the Mercedes, so both Hamilton and Leclerc didn't make a stop and stayed out on the track. By lap 13, the virtual safety car was withdrawn, and now, the race was looking great for Mercedes as long as there wasn't another neutralization later on with a safety car or a red flag. By lap 15, what everyone expected happened. Alonso retired from the race, but after a few laps he came back to keep gathering information, although eventually both he and Lance Stroll ended up retiring from the race to safeguard the few parts left on the car. And by lap 18, another virtual safety car was brought out thanks to Valtteri Bottas's Cadillac, which stopped at the entrance of the pit lane. Lindblad, Berman, Bortoleto, Verstappen and Checo Perez took advantage of the virtual safety car to make their pit stops. However, this could have worked out well for Ferrari if it weren't for the terrible bad luck that due to Bottas's position and where the car was abandoned, when the marshals had to push the car through the pit lane, they had to close it. And that meant Ferrari couldn't take advantage of this neutralization to bring both of their drivers into the pits. The virtual safety car ended on lap 20 and the race restarted, but by this point Ferrari was already lost. Further back, we saw Verstappen overtake Lindblad for 6th place, continuing to make progress with his comeback, while we also saw some clashes between Liam Lawson and Checo Perez, as well as between Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly, who were really going at it in the lower part of the grid. But up front, the Ferraris could no longer hold on with that set of tires, as George Russell had already caught up to them and erased a 10-second gap between them. And so, Ferrari sends Leclerc to the pits on lap 25. Hamilton stays out on track, and by lap 28, he's overtaken by George Russell. And on that same lap, the British driver pits, leaving both Ferraris behind both Mercedes. So the only hope Ferrari had left at this point to turn the race around was that with their tires, which would be much fresher than Mercedes's, they would have a better pace towards the end of the Grand Prix. But surprise, not only was tire degradation not affecting Mercedes, but Ferrari's pace wasn't better either, and they couldn't get close to the pace George Russell was setting at that moment. So, after that virtual safety car that they couldn't take advantage of and having to pit under green flag conditions, they had to settle for those positions unless a safety car came out to bunch up the group again. With the lead decided, the focus shifted to the group behind as Verstappen rapidly closed in on Lando Norris, threatening his 5th place. Just as he was close enough to overtake, another virtual safety car appeared due to debris from Checo Perez's car. And they ended up in the speed zone between turns 8 and 9. Of the few drivers who took advantage, Gabriel Bortoleto aimed to finish with another stint on hard tires, but with fresh tires, he could push for a strong points haul in this season's first race. When the virtual safety car ended, Verstappen kept pressuring Lando Norris, who immediately went into the pits before Verstappen could overtake him. The Dutchman, for his part, went into the pits on lap 42 to make his final stop and try to go after Lando. Now the roles were reversed. Verstappen was on hard tires and Norris was on medium tires. And while Verstappen was trying to close the gap again to the British driver, Bortoleto made his strategy work as he quickly got past Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly, thus managing to capture 9th place in the race. But the number of laps was not enough to catch up to Oliver Burman and Arvid Lindblad, even though the Brazilian driver managed to get quite close in the final stages of the Grand Prix. And the last thing this race gave us was 10 laps of constant pressure from Verstappen on Norris, where the latter managed his battery very well. And with that, he was able to defend against Max, who, despite being less than a second behind and able to use overtake mode, couldn't get past Lando Norris, who held off the 4-time world champion with very good battery management. And despite pressuring him for 10 long laps in the end, Max gave up and settled for 6th place. And up front, things pretty much didn't change after the last break. When lap 58 arrived, George Russell won the first race of the year by a landslide, and for the first time in his life, he became the leader of the Formula One World Championship. First victory of the season for George Russell, who, despite the initial complications, proves his status as the favorite. He wins, dominates, and takes the first 25 points of the season, in what could be a year of dominance for Mercedes if things continue as we saw in this Grand Prix. The rest of the top 10 of the Australian Grand Prix would finish as follows. 2nd place for Antonelli, who gets back on track after the mistake in practice number 3 and after that poor start. Charles Leclerc finished 3rd, completing the podium. He had a good start and tried to win, but couldn't do much more. 4th place for Hamilton, with a very good pace at the end of the Grand Prix. 5th position for Lando Norris. 6th place for Verstappen, whose comeback ended there. 7th position for Oliver Bergman. 8th place and a standing ovation for Arvid Lindblad. 9th place for Gabriel Bortoleto, and points for Audi in their Formula One debut. And closing the top 10, Pierre Gasly, taking the last point of this race. Honestly, my feelings at this point are hard to understand regarding the race we just experienced. On one hand, the first laps were interesting with that little battle between Russell and Leclerc, but on the other hand, everything still feels very artificial. Also, the race did start well, but it died out after the first virtual safety cars, and not even the midfield had very interesting battles. It's really hard for me to draw conclusions, but my rating for this Grand Prix will be a 7, at least an entertaining race, although I think I'm being very generous because I honestly expected something much worse this weekend and I think the race wasn't that bad. My drivers of the day are Russell, who dominates and proves his status as the favorite, Leclerc, who was able to challenge the Mercedes at the start of the Grand Prix, and Arvid Lindblad, who finishes his first race in Formula 1 in a very strong and solid way. And my disappointment is Formula 1 in general. Yes, I know I said the race wasn't bad, the problem is that everything feels very unnatural. A Formula 1 that's hard to understand, and once you manage to understand it, you realize how artificial the battles are and how little excitement there is in things like qualifying. I'm not saying it will always be this way, but as a longtime Formula 1 fan, I still can't connect with this new era of the big circus. We'll have to see how things change, when these regulations become solid or some changes are made to improve the show on track. But ladies and gentlemen, with this we finish the first summary of the year for the 2026 Australian Grand Prix of Formula 1. But this is where I ask you, what did you think of the Grand Prix? Have you liked this era of Formula 1? Has it disappointed you? Share who you thought were the standout drivers and disappointments from this Australian Grand Prix. Let me know all your opinions in the comments section. That's all from me. I'll say goodbye by telling you that if you like this video, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel, turn on notifications so you know when I'm uploading a new video, and share this content. I invite you to follow us on Instagram and Twitter using the links in this video's description. See you soon for more content on your Skyline Racing channel. Thank you for tuning in and see you later.